So the issue of the Supreme Court ruling against district court nationwide injunctions is a bigger deal than everyone thinks, and people have been making a pretty big deal out of it. So let me explain. It has at least two major consequences, one of which is actually the very high likelihood that Donald Trump is going to bring fewer cases to the Supreme Court when he loses on the district level. And I'll explain why that is the case. Number two is the fact that many of the cases that are currently being litigated are ones that, in fact, are in direct tension with the Constitution, and the result of it is probably going to be even more consolidation of power to the President of the United States. And that leads to number three, possibly my largest concern. Because of all of this, it is highly unlikely that Republicans can allow the possibility of there being another Democrat president. And they will do everything that they can, not just in terms of things like gerrymandering, right, but also possibly illegal actions that they will take, anything legal and possibly illegal that they can do to prevent it. And let me explain why. Okay, so number one, these nationwide injunctions are not just a problem for Republicans. We need to be aware of that. Presidents like power, they like to use their power, they like to move quickly, they're politicians. So when they don't get things done, it goes poorly for them. They're more likely to lose the next election, they don't look as good, so on and so forth. So this isn't just a Donald Trump thing. Presidents have been complaining about nationwide injunctions for decades. It happened to Biden, famously, right, with the whole waiving student loans issue, right? It was put on pause. It was put on hold with a nationwide injunction in one district, which then included the entire country, and then it went to the Supreme Court. But think about how differently that would have gone. It could have been a circumstance where if nationwide injunctions were not allowed, well, it would have been struck down in that one district, but everyone else in the country still could have had their student loans forgiven. And by the time it got to the Supreme Court, it probably would have already been too late. Or, to my point, it may not have gone to the Supreme Court at all. In other words, Biden might have just said, okay, fine. If that district in Texas doesn't want student loan forgiveness, fine, we'll let everybody else have it. And why take the risk of it going to the Supreme Court if you know that the Supreme Court is not likely to rule favorably? Okay, so here's the fact of the matter, though. This is also a Donald Trump problem. Joe Biden had something like 118 executive orders throughout his entire 4 years, which, let's be honest, is a fair number. Like, that's a lot of times that instead of having Congress do a thing, you personally, as the president, in essence, kind of make a law. Donald Trump has already done 164 of them. It's been, 6 months of him being president? So if he continues at the rate he is, which is maybe a little bit less likely, but even if he continues somewhat similarly, we're talking about him easily doing 4 times as many executive orders as the previous president, and far more than any president in the history of the country. And part of why this is especially concerning is not only is this a matter of already having more power to the presidency by virtue of the fact that the only people who can strike it down would in fact be the Supreme Court. They can't be put on pause until the Supreme Court. Look at some of the things that Donald Trump is trying to do. Yes, some of the executive orders are largely innocuous but expensive, like renaming the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, we have to pay for that and that's expensive, but I guess in theory it doesn't really challenge the Constitution. It doesn't challenge our democracy. It doesn't challenge our democratic republic. But look at some of the other orders that are going to be under litigation if they haven't already been, right? One is the ending of birthright citizenship. You've already heard about that. Wherever you fall on that, just recognize the fact that it's literally in the Constitution, right? So the fact that the President of the United States did not try to go through Congress to do it, but instead just tried to kind of by fiat change it with an executive order is a concern. And you, if you're a MAGA person, know that you would have hated it if something similar had been done by a Democrat. You might have liked the thing they were trying to do. You might be like, that's a good idea. I like that idea. But you would have been definitely against it, at least in principle, right? Now, let's be honest, you probably wouldn't have liked whatever they were trying to do either. But the point being is the problem of violating the Constitution if you're the president. Well, he's also signed an executive order to expand domestic surveillance for anyone who's protesting, right? So that should be a concern for all of us because that kind of domestic surveillance is going to go beyond protesters. And obviously, being able to protest is in the Constitution. And you might be like, well, all those protesters are bad people. Okay, but remember, until it's you that wants to protest a Democrat, right, or you that wants to storm the Capitol, that kind of stuff is very invasive, where they're going to be able to use AI, and they already are, to find you and locate you. And once that's already in the books, once that infrastructure is already there, it will not just stay located to protest. You know that, and I know that. He's signed an executive order to remove all federal funding from any states that act as sanctuary states or cities. And again, you might be against sanctuary states or cities, but the fact of the matter is, funding is not granted by the President of the United States. Funding is granted by Congress. So this is an executive order that directly violates Congress's ability to control the money. He's also signed a similar executive order that cuts funding to universities if they allow protests. Well, again, that funding is not allocated by the president. Funding is allocated by Congress. And in theory, Congress, by the way, whether or not you like Congress or not, it is far more representative of our democratic republic. In other words, it's your representatives that are up there. The president is just one person. Congress is hundreds of them who are all supposed to represent all of us. That's where more of our voice is heard. So more and more of that power is being taken away by executive order. But that power shouldn't be able to be taken away by executive order. Congress should have to give up that power if they so choose through legislation. He's also put out a executive order that requires patriotic education in schools. Now think about that for a second. You might like patriotic education, but what we're really talking about here is pro-Trump education that removes divisive concepts. So in other words, it's going to remove things like slavery. It's going to remove things like labor unions. It's going to remove any conversation about women's rights or women not being allowed to vote through most of the history of the United States, because those are all going to be seen as divisive things. If you are comfortable with that, you're probably only comfortable with that right now. You would not be comfortable with it if it was under Joe Biden. You know it, and I know it. So that leads to this final concern that I have, which is simply this. The amount of power now that is being allocated to the president by the Supreme Court because of this is so much that Republicans could never allow another Democrat president. They can't allow it. Why? Simply because of the fact that it's so much power that they are terrified of that. And frankly, we all should be. No president, Democrat or Republican, should be allowed to basically just change congressional laws by the sign of an auto pen. So we should all be very concerned. And notice, of course, that this is often going to result in really weird things, like maybe one state allowing citizenship for children who are born to immigrants, another state not. How do we figure that out? Or it's different from district to district. There's going to be massive amounts of money that people are going to have to spend to be able to bring their cases to court. Like, for instance, with the student loan thing, well, your student loans are not represented by that one case anymore. You personally in Florida in your district, and you in Georgia in your district, and you in New York in your district. So if you think that the president is violating your rights, the only option ends up being a class action lawsuit, and your hope that you'll be able to find funding for that. The whole thing is an utter and terrifying mess. And it's going to leave many presidents in circumstances where they might be in a position such where they go, okay, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and sign this executive order. It's ruled unconstitutional in this one district. Fine. Let them have whatever it is they want. But I'm just going to let it be the case in the rest of the country. I'm not going to let it go to the Supreme Court. We're not going to challenge the ruling. So this is a massive concern, something that we should all be very worried about, whatever side of the aisle we are on. We should never be comfortable with what a president is doing just because we happen to agree with their policies or belief sets. We are a democratic republic. And so the result of that means that every once in a while, presidents are going to do things that we don't like. And at that point, we're going to be really glad that there are constraints on them. If you are okay with those constraints taken off of them just because you happen to like their policies, what happens when it changes to some other president? And then your only hope is You make it impossible for there ever to be any other kind of president. And that is when you are no longer in a republic, you are no longer in a democracy, and you are no longer the United States of America. Okay, if I missed anything, let me know. Do you disagree? What other executive orders are you concerned about? If you're a MAGA supporter, okay, let me know. Let me know what I'm missing about this. I am always happy to have polite conversations with you. I want to get everyone's thoughts here. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.